On the Poseidon's Pearl oil rig, Captain Corbin senses impending danger and heightened security. Meanwhile, Somali pirate Omar Hassan plans to hijack the rig, aiming for a massive ransom. Frank, the rig's janitor with a hidden past as the Deadly Reaper, detects the threat, foreshadowing a violent clash. Omar's pirates storm the rig, leading to chaos and casualties. Frank, triggered by the violence, reverts to his Reaper persona. He sabotages communications and rigs traps, turning the rig into a deadly maze for the pirates. As the pirates grow fearful and suspicious, Frank uses the rig's PA system to sow discord among them, revealing Omar's potential betrayal and exploiting their greed. Frank's actions lead to infighting among the pirates, while he continues to eliminate them one by one. He reflects on his past as a soldier in Somalia, haunted by the violence and the boy soldier he couldn't save. This fuels his determination to stop the pirates and break the cycle of violence. Frank confronts Idris, Omar's lieutenant, attempting to sway him against Omar. A firefight erupts, resulting in a massive fire that engulfs the engine room. Frank spares Omar's life, choosing to let him face justice rather than succumbing to his vengeful instincts. As rescue forces arrive, securing the rig and capturing the pirates, Frank discards his dog tag, symbolizing his rejection of his past identity. He escapes on a life raft, leaving behind the burning rig and the promise of Omar's revenge, but also with a sense of closure and hope for a peaceful future, having confronted his demons and chosen redemption. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Poseidon's Pearl. The dawn bled across the sky, a bruised palette of peach and violet. The Indian Ocean, an ebony expanse, shimmered faintly as a whisper of breeze stirred its surface. Hundreds of miles from the lawless Somali coast, the Poseidon's Pearl, a defiant bastion of steel and illumination, pierced the aquatic void. From afar, it resembled a glittering metropolis of towers and platforms, interwoven by a network of walkways and pipes. The metallic cadence of industry, the deep-throated hum of powerful machinery, dared to break the ocean's profound stillness. Captain Miles Corbin, a silhouette against the panoramic windows of the bridge, surveyed the awakening world. Years of sun and brine had etched their story onto his granite features, his eyes holding the glint of hard-won knowledge. He cradled a steaming mug, the strong aroma a familiar solace against the pre-dawn chill. His gaze swept over his domain, a silent, daily ritual. The Pearl was his burden, her crew his responsibility, a weight he carried with unwavering resolve. The water lay tranquil, yet Corbin knew its deceptive nature. Like fate, the sea could erupt in fury without warning. "Anything on the scope, Mr. Jones?" His voice, roughened by time and weather, held a steely edge. The young radar operator, barely a man, swiveled in his chair. "Negative, Captain. Just the usual fishing boats, keeping their distance." Corbin nodded, yet a knot of apprehension remained. Those usual fishing boats served as a convenient smokescreen in these waters, easily concealing far more menacing intentions. Piracy had surged, growing increasingly bold. The Pearl, isolated and brimming with valuable crude, was a siren's call. "Maintain heightened vigilance," he ordered. "Double the watch on perimeter cameras. I want eyes on anything within 20 nautical miles." "Aye, Captain," Jones responded, his fingers dancing across the console. Corbin sipped his coffee, the bitterness failing to alleviate the disquiet that gnawed at him. He trusted his gut, and it was screaming a warning. Complacency was a luxury he couldn't afford. Vigilance, the price of survival. Beneath the bridge, the rig's slumber began to dissipate. The night crew prepared to hand over to the day shift. In the galley, Johnson, a mountain of a man, was already orchestrating a breakfast symphony of bacon, eggs, and grits. The savory scent of frying bacon drifted through the corridors, a beacon chasing away the lingering shadows. Evelyn Reed, the rig's chief engineer, moved with purpose through the labyrinth of pipes and equipment, her boots ringing on the metal mesh. A brilliant mind housed in a frame of unwavering strength. She commanded respect in a sphere dominated by men. Her dark hair was bound tightly, her face bearing the proud marks of her trade, a testament to her practical bent. Armed with a clipboard, she scrutinized gauges and dials, a meticulous guardian of the rig's vital systems. "Morning, Evelyn," a voice echoed. She turned to face a young technician, his face bearing the stamp of exhaustion. "Morning, Mark. How's that new pump holding?" "Seems stable enough," he replied. "Pressure's consistent. No signs of seepage." "Good," she noted, scribbling on her clipboard. "But keep a close watch. I'm not fond of unwelcome surprises." Evelyn demanded perfection, a relentless pursuit of excellence for herself and her team. She understood the catastrophic potential of even minor malfunctions on a structure like the Pearl. The ocean was an unforgiving master, offering no quarter for error. Despite her efforts, Evelyn couldn't shake a prickling unease. The air felt thick with an unspoken tension. She attributed it to fatigue, the byproduct of long hours and relentless pressure. But the feeling persisted, a subtle alarm bell ringing in the back of her mind. Deep within the rig's belly, the engines throbbed, their vibrations coursing through the steel skeleton. The relentless drill continued its hungry descent, extracting liquid gold from the Earth's embrace. The Pearl was a leviathan, a mechanical entity fueled by oil and ambition, a marvel of human design. It was nevertheless exposed, isolated, and beyond the reach of easy assistance. Above, on the bridge, Corbin stared into the horizon, his gaze sharp. The sun had finally escaped the cloud's grasp, bathing the ocean in a gilded glow. Yet, its warmth did little to penetrate the chill that had settled in his soul. He harbored a dark premonition, a sense of gathering storm. He could only hope he was mistaken. Operating here carried known dangers. The sea's allure was potent, but it was a capricious mistress, and the Pearl, a tempting prize. Below decks, Frank, the night shift janitor, moved through the deserted corridors, the rhythmic whoosh of his mop a gentle counterpoint to the rig's mechanical orchestra. A man of quiet demeanor, his existence barely registered among the crew. But beneath his unassuming facade lay a past as roiling and dark as the sea itself. He paused, his gaze drawn to a porthole. The ocean beckoned, its immensity mirroring his own haunted spirit. He shared the captain's unease, an intuition born from experience. He sensed the approaching tempest, a pressure building toward climax. He was the eye of the storm, or so he believed, the shadow of Omar. The kerosene lamp sputtered, casting elongated, wavering shapes across Omar Hassan's weathered features, carving deep trenches around his eyes and the corners of his mouth. The tin walls of the shack offered scant shelter from the abrasive Somali wind, an unyielding testament to their precarious existence. He unfurled a worn nautical chart atop a salvaged crate, its time-worn symbols barely discernible in the gloom. His crew huddled around him, their faces etched with anticipation and trepidation, eyes glued to the map. The Poseidon's Pearl. Omar's voice resonated, a deep baritone cutting through the wind's howl. He jabbed a gnarled finger at a solitary point on the sprawling Indian Ocean. A veritable treasure trove of crude, ripe for the plucking. Idris Musa, his lieutenant, a man whose face bore the topography of hardship and sun-baked experience, leaned closer. His tone, calm and considered, provided a stark contrast to Omar's coiled energy. "The hazards, Omar, are considerable. This installation is heavily guarded, we understand. Far beyond the tankers we typically target." A spark ignited in Omar's eyes.
Danger lurk everywhere, Idris.
"It's in our blood. But so, too, does opportunity. This prize promises more than a year of tanker raids combined. Imagine. Sustenance for our families, arms to defend ourselves, the influence we can command." His gaze swept over the men, each word a potent mixture of desperation and soaring ambition. Are we men, or beasts, content to scavenge for crumbs? A low murmur resonated through the group. Jamal, a youth barely past boyhood, fidgeted. He admired Omar's audacity, yet the prospect of facing such a formidable opponent sent icy tendrils of anxiety through his gut. This marked only his third operation, and the chilling echoes of the last, the screams, the crimson tide, the terrified visages of the crew, still plagued his sleep. What are the defenses? Idris persisted, his stare unwavering. Rumors speak of armed sentries, sophisticated surveillance. We can't depend on mere surprise. Omar's grin flashed, a stark white against the dimness. Deception is child's play, Idris. We rely on strategy, precision, and subverted expectations. He tapped the chart once more. They anticipate a seaborne assault, a swarm scaling the decks. We shall offer them something unexpected. He produced a second, more detailed blueprint, exposing the Poseidon's Pearl's inner workings. The rig possesses vulnerabilities, chinks in its armor. The maintenance corridors, the ventilation systems. These are our secret passages to victory. We will infiltrate, secure vital positions, and seize control from within. With speed, with silence. The men scrutinized the diagram, their expressions tight with focus. Omar indicated marked areas. Jamal, you and Abdi will neutralize the engine room. Shut down the generators. Idris, you will spearhead the assault on the control center. I will commandeer the bridge. We advance as one, we strike as one, we prevail as one. He rose, his towering frame projecting an even larger shadow across the shack. Now let us examine our instruments of war. Let us ensure they are eager for the task. The men trailed him outside, into the crisp night air. Concealed among the dunes behind the shack lay a stash of weaponry. AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, fragmentation grenades, and an assortment of other death-dealing devices. Omar surveyed the arsenal with a discerning eye. Cleanliness is akin to piety, my comrades, he declared, his voice edged with dark humor. A malfunctioning weapon is a forfeited life. The men got to work, fastidiously cleaning and lubricating their firearms. Jamal, his hands exhibiting a slight tremor, disassembled his AK-47. He possessed the knowledge to wield it, the skill to kill with it, yet the mere thought filled him with dread. He shot a glance at Omar, who was expertly adjusting the sights on an RPG launcher. The man appeared utterly immune to fear, his concentration absolute. Idris approached Jamal, his face creased with concern. You appear troubled, lad, he remarked softly. What weighs on your mind? Jamal hesitated, uncertain whether to confide in Idris. He held the older man in high esteem, valued his sagacity, but feared expressing his misgivings would be perceived as weakness. Finally, he confessed, his voice barely audible. I'm not sure I can do this, Idris. The last encounter, it was horrific. Idris placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. I understand, lad. This existence, it is not for everyone. But we endure, we do what is imperative to survive. To provide for those we hold dear. To safeguard what is ours. But is it just? Jamal questioned, his voice thick with distress. Is it just to murder, to pilfer, to sow terror? Idris sighed wearily. Justice and morality. These are luxuries we can ill afford. We are children of the sea, Jamal. We seize what we require when we require it. It is the way of the world. He paused, his gaze hardening. But remember this, lad. We do not kill for sport. We do not inflict needless suffering. We claim what belongs to us, and we depart with our honor intact. That distinguishes us from the brutes. Omar, having overheard their exchange, approached. His eyes narrowed into slits. Hesitation is a plague, Jamal, he snapped. It enfeebles the spirit, it hobbles the body. If you lack the stomach for what must be done, you serve no purpose to me. Jamal recoiled, shame burning in his cheeks. I will not disappoint you, Omar, he stammered. I will execute what is necessary. Omar studied him intently, his expression inscrutable. Then he clapped Jamal on the back, his grip surprisingly firm. Good. Now, let us prepare for the predatory excursion. Tomorrow we stake our claim. He turned his back on Jamal, his focus already fixed upon the weapons arrayed before him. As Jamal resumed cleaning his rifle, a bone-chilling sense of fate washed over him. He was ensnared, caught within a violent loop that seemed impossible to break free from. He peered out at the vast, inky expanse of the ocean, wondering if absolution was within reach, if a different life was even a remote possibility. But the sole response he received was the ceaseless rasp of the wind, a persistent reminder of the specter of Omar that cast a long shadow over them all. Night shift. The fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, their sterile glare reflecting off the polished linoleum as Frank guided the mop bucket down the silent corridor. The rhythmic swish of water provided a lonely soundtrack to the monotonous drone of the ventilation system. 2 a.m. Another graveyard shift at Poseidon's Pearl. Years of ingrained habit propelled him forward with economical precision, preventing any slippage of discipline, even in this most banal routine. The abrasive rasp of the mop head, the faint astringency of the disinfectant. These were the sights and scents of his chosen exile, a life deliberately calibrated for obscurity, for tranquility, a universe away from the concussive blast of ordnance and the acrid tang of gunpowder. He paused by a steel door emblazoned with Janitor Room, authorized personnel only, its chill surface biting through his gloves. Behind it, the deep-throated rumble of colossal engines vibrated through the deck, a synthetic heartbeat sustaining this artificial island adrift in the Indian Ocean. He pictured the engineers toiling within, their faces lit by the oscillating glow of control panels as they calibrated and maintained the machinery. He envied their absorption, their ability to become lost in the complexities of their work. His own mind, a turbulent ocean of recollections, rarely granted him such solace. Just another night, he muttered to himself, resuming his circuit. Keep moving, keep breathing, keep scrubbing star. He rounded a corner, entering the galley. Here, the air carried the lingering aroma of day-old coffee and the remnants of the crew's evening meal. He scoured the stainless steel counters, expunging grease and crumbs with the same unwavering commitment he'd once devoted to cleaning his M4. Different tools, same unwavering dedication. A glint of polished metal offered back his reflection from the coffee machine's surface. The man staring back was a specter. The taut, sinewy face of the soldier had dissolved. In its place was a mask of fatigue, etched with the deep valleys of sleepless nights and unwelcome memories. Yet, the eyes remained a glacial blue, piercing and watchful, hinting at the tightly wound spring beneath the surface. Reaper, they had called him once. A lifetime shed, a skin outgrown. He sighed, the sound swallowed by the mechanical symphony of the rig. Peace. That's all I ask. Just a modicum of peace, star. He proceeded to the mess hall, a vast, echoing space furnished with long tables and anchored chairs. The pervasive silence was punctuated only by the periodic groan of the rig adjusting to the ocean swells. He started mopping the floor, his motions measured and deliberate, each stroke a small act of resistance against the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, a shadow stretched across the floor. He straightened, turning to find Old Man Patel shuffling toward him, a thermos nestled in his calloused hand. Patel, one of the rig's cooks, was a wiry Indian man who had spent decades working on offshore platforms. "Evening, Frank," Patel greeted, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Quiet night, no?" "As always," Frank responded, forcing a smile to his face. Patel chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Don't get too comfortable. This old world, she always has a surprise tucked up her sleeve." He gestured with his thermos. "Want some chai? Keeps out the chill." Frank hesitated. He preferred solitude, minimizing unnecessary interaction. But Patel was a good man, a benign presence. Sure, Patel. Thanks. They settled into companionable silence, sipping the sweet, spiced tea. The soft murmur of waves against the rig's support structure was the only sound. You ever think about going back, Frank? Patel queried without warning. His gaze locked on the inky expanse of the ocean. Frank tensed. Back. The word sounded alien, almost profane. No, he murmured. I don't have a place to go back to. Patel nodded slowly, suggesting an understanding deeper than Frank had revealed. Everyone has a place, Frank, even if it lives only in memory. He finished his tea and rose, his joints protesting with age. You take care now, and don't push yourself too hard. Frank watched him depart, the weight of Patel's words pressing down on him. A memory. Was that his total inheritance? A collection of shattered fragments, stained with blood and shadowed by regret? He concluded his work in the mess hall, his thoughts churning. He struggled to concentrate on the task at hand, to find refuge in the rhythm of the mop, but the darkness continued its insidious advance, whispering doubts. He moved on to the crew quarters, a labyrinth of narrow passageways and confined cabins. Most of the men were asleep, spent from their demanding shifts. He could discern the muted snores and murmurs emanating from behind closed doors. He felt a pang of envy for their unconsciousness. As he worked, something struck him as discordant. A door slightly ajar, a sliver of light slicing through the darkened hallway. He stopped, his senses heightened. He hadn't witnessed anyone enter or exit this section of the rig. He approached the door with caution, his hand instinctively drifting toward the wrench secured in his tool belt. He widened the opening, his eyes sweeping the cramped cabin. It was uninhabited, but something felt amiss. The air was charged with an unusual tension, a subtle unease that prickled his skin. A duffel bag rested on the bunk, partially obscured by a blanket. It was new, high-end, and incongruous within this Spartan setting. He reached for the bag, his pulse quickening. He unzipped it slowly, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. Within, cradled among folded clothing, lay a black assault rifle, an AK-47, its steel surface gleaming menacingly in the subdued light. The thrum of the ventilation system seemed to amplify, filling his ears. He stared at the weapon, his mind reeling in disbelief. This was out of place. This was beyond abnormal. Something was profoundly wrong. Surprise tucked up her sleeve. Patel's words drifted back to him. He closed the bag, his features hardening. The weariness vanished, replaced by a cold, deliberate resolve. The Reaper was stirring, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the peace he yearned for was about to be irrevocably shattered. The ghosts of his past had come to collect, and this time they demanded an audience. The night shift was poised to escalate dramatically. Echoes of Reaper, the desert wind, a rasping lament, scoured the landscape, peppering Frank's eyes with grit as he peered through the scope. Not Frank, though. Not here. Here he was Reaper. Frank was the pale imitation, the man who scrubbed floors and flinched at reflections. Reaper cataloged every infinitesimal detail, the way sunlight fractured on a shard of glass, the dust motes dancing in the enemy's breath. He could chart a bullet's path before it even left the barrel. Through the mirage-slick heat, they materialized a motley crew of insurgents, their assault rifles catching the glare. Their prey, a hamlet clinging to the world's edge, outnumbered by livestock. Intel was ironclad. Innocence, ground beneath the heel of a tribal feud, bankrolled from afar. Reaper's directive, neutralize the threat. He regulated his breathing, a slow, measured rhythm, silencing the wind's shriek, the sun's blaze, the persistent thrum of conscience. Only the target existed, the rifle an extension of his will, a frigid precision honed to an edge. The first report cracked across the stillness. The lead insurgent, puffed up with borrowed courage, dropped like a puppet with severed strings, a crimson bloom staining his forehead. The others scattered, their cries lost to the wind's howl.
No rash moves.
Reaper culled them with meticulous care, each shot a quiet expulsion, each kill a testament to efficiency. A macabre ballet sculpted by years of relentless conditioning. He flowed through the landscape, unseen, unheard, a wraith made of shadows and starlight. He bent the terrain, the sun's angle, even the wind itself to his purpose. A fusillade erupted from behind a craggy outcrop. Reaper flattened himself against the earth, his senses singing. He pinpointed the shooter's location, calculated the trajectory, and squeezed the trigger. A strangled gasp, then stillness. He finished the job with pitiless economy, leaving a tableau of still forms etched against the sand. The village elder, a man etched with the longitudes and latitudes of grief, approached cautiously, offering a goatskin of water and a hesitant nod. Reaper accepted the water, but it tasted like sand and regret. He saw not gratitude in the elder's eyes, but a desolate acceptance, the understanding that violence was a permanent fixture, a self-perpetuating cycle. He knew that for everyone he felled, another would sprout in its place, nourished by need, desperation, and the glut of weapons choking the region. The sun hammered down. His team arrived, for grim specters in desert camouflage. They initiated the grim ritual of securing the area, inventorying the arms, preparing for exfiltration. "Sharp work, Reaper," Sergeant Miller rumbled, thumping him on the back. "By the book." Reaper remained silent, his gaze fixed on the sprawled figures, their faces frozen in rictus grins of surprise. He saw not combatants, but boys, barely men, ensnared in a tapestry of circumstance beyond their comprehension. The helicopter descended like a mechanical hawk. As they ascended, Reaper cast a final glance at the village. The women and children spilled from their dwellings, relief etched on their faces. But something else lingered there as well, a tremor of apprehension, the knowledge that respite was fleeting, ephemeral. That night, back at the base, sleep remained just out of reach. He lay on his cot, the imprint of the dead seared onto his eyelids. He saw their faces, imagined their families, mourned their stolen futures. He heard the echoes of gunfire, the keening of the dying, the wind whispering their names into the void. He struggled to convince himself that his actions were justified, that he had safeguarded the vulnerable. But the guilt clawed at him, an insidious parasite consuming his soul. He was a weapon, an instrument of war, and the stain on his conscience would never fade. Weeks spun by, culminating in a mission that would shatter everything. A raid on a suspected terrorist training facility hidden within the mountains. The intelligence was flawed. They infiltrated under the cloak of night, anticipating minimal resistance. They were catastrophically wrong. The compound was a fortress, heavily fortified and fiercely defended. The battle erupted in a maelstrom of chaos. Explosions tore through the ground. Bullets sliced through the air like angry wasps. Reaper moved with lethal grace, dismantling enemy fighters with cold, detached efficiency. Then he saw her, a girl, barely 10 years old, huddled behind a pile of crates. She clutched a tattered doll, her eyes mirroring the inferno around her. Reaper seized up. He couldn't fire. He was rooted in place. A terrorist materialized from the shadows, his AK-47 leveled. He was about to unleash hell upon the child. Reaper reacted without thought. He surged forward, shielding the girl from the blast. The bullets ripped through him, tearing ragged holes in his flesh. He collapsed, the world tilting on its axis. He saw the girl, unscathed, scurrying away. He heard the screams of his comrades, the thunder of gunfire. He felt the scorching agony, the lifeblood draining from his body. He surrendered to the darkness, expecting oblivion. But it didn't come. His team dragged him out, bandaged his wounds, and loaded him onto a medevac. He cheated death. But Reaper perished that day. He awoke in a sterile hospital room, his body a roadmap of scars, his spirit fractured. He was hailed as a hero. He had saved a life. He was awarded a medal. But all he felt was hollow. He had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had recognized him. He had witnessed the stark, unvarnished face of war, the senseless savagery, the irreparable damage. There was no return. Reaper was obsolete. He was discharged, granted a pension, and left to gather the shards of his ruined existence. He reinvented himself, discarded his past, and vanished into the anonymity of the everyday. He became Frank Harding, the reticent, unassuming janitor on an oil rig, a world removed from the theater of war. But the ghosts of Reaper still trailed him like shadows. The memories of the fallen, the cries of the wounded, the face of the young girl. They were always present, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be summoned. And now it seemed they were about to be. The discovery of the AK-47 in the abandoned cabin was more than a mere threat. It was an invocation, a call to arms, a stark reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that perhaps the only path to redemption lies in confronting the demons that pursue you, in harnessing the darkness to champion the light. He felt a familiar chill creep over him, a disengagement from the world. The trepidation, the uncertainty, the guilt, they receded, replaced by a singular focus, a cold, unwavering resolve. Frank had faded. Reaper had returned. Skiffs on the horizon. The gulf of Aiden's inky cloak was torn by the rasping snarl of outboard engines. 3 skiffs, burdened low and thick with men, knifed through the swells, their only illumination the ephemeral green scrawls of phosphorescence, fleeting hieroglyphs against the smothering black. Omar Hassan's fingers tightened around the AK-47's grip, its familiar chill a meager comfort against sweat-slicked skin. He peered towards the distant, winking lights of the Poseidon's pearl, a jewel shimmering in the vast emptiness. "Hurry!" he growled, the words swallowed by the engine's din. "More speed. Dawn's kiss should find us there." Beside him, Idris Musa, his second, a man whose face was a roadmap of hardship carved by the sea, offered a curt nod. "The water favors us this eve, Omar. Yet haste alone is folly. Prudence, and a precise hammer blow. Recite the litany." Omar grunted, impatience a fiery undercurrent to his stoicism. The litany. He knew it by rote, thanks to Idris's constant reminders. A swift ingress, command of the nerve center, suppression of opposition, and a ransom demand broadcast before American warbirds could cast their shadows. So simple in theory. Reality, however, rarely mirrored theory's tidy elegance. In the prow of the lead skiff, Jamal huddled, the spray a stinging nettle on his skin. One of Omar's youngest, scarcely a man, he cradled his antiquated Kalashnikov, the weapon an alien weight in his hands. Killer? Not yet, but desperation, a ravenous beast gnawing at his gut, fueled by the ceaseless hunger plaguing his village, had steered him here. Eyes squeezed shut, he conjured his mother's visage, her work-worn hands, her silent supplications. This, he told himself, was for her survival. He chanced a glance at his companion, a seasoned warrior whose eyes mirrored the abyss of the sea. The man met his gaze, a bloodless smile stretching his lips, revealing teeth the color of dried earth from chewing cot. Jamal recoiled, a cold coil tightening in his abdomen. Aboard the Poseidon's Pearl, dawn remained a whispered promise. The air, thick with salt and the tang of diesel, pressed down like a lead weight. Captain Miles Corbin stood sentinel on the bridge, a lone figure etched against the dim luminescence of the consoles. He sipped tepid coffee, its bitterness failing to penetrate the fog of fatigue. His gaze swept the inky canvas of the ocean. The radio sputtered to life, a fractured voice slicing through the quiet. "Captain Corbin, this is Deckhand Miller. All decks secure. Routine patrol concluded." "Acknowledged, Miller." Corbin's voice, sandpapered with weariness, replied, "Maintain vigilance. Over. He stared out, a prickling unease crawling beneath his skin. Something felt amiss. The ocean's stillness was unnerving, the air too heavy, almost expectant. He had ridden out tempests aplenty in his years at sea, but this was different. This was a malignancy festering unseen, a threat cloaked in silence. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, his wife, back in Galveston, and the pledge he'd made this voyage would be his swan song. He yearned for an end to the solitude, the constant gnawing anxiety, the crushing burden of command he shouldered day after day. He craved the simple comforts of home, Sarah's savory aromas, the embrace of their fireplace, the music of laughter filling their home. But tonight, those comforts felt a lifetime away. Tonight, he was merely a captain on his bridge, poised against an unseen foe. Below, life unfolded in its predictable cadence. The night watch performed their duties, blissfully ignorant of the encroaching peril. In the galley, Benny, a cook, hummed a cheerful tune as he prepared breakfast, the savory lure of frying bacon permeating the air. Down in the engine room, two grease-smeared engineers grappled with a bulky generator. In their berths, men stirred fitfully, dreaming of hearth and kin, a future beyond the steel confines of the rig. Out on the water, Omar Hassan raised a hand, signaling the skiffs to decelerate. The Poseidon's pearl materialized closer now, a behemoth of metal rising from the waves. He could discern the details: the helipad, the web of pipes and gantries, the skeletal frame of the drilling tower. "Ready yourselves," he rasped, his voice taut with anticipation. "Remember the plan.
No banton bloodshed.
We desire the platform, not carnage." Yet, even as the words left his lips, he harbored no illusion. Violence was the only vernacular he truly spoke, his sole instrument. He had witnessed too much death, inflicted too much suffering, to believe in bloodless outcomes. Jamal felt his pulse hammer in his throat. He squeezed his weapon, knuckles bone-white. He shut his eyes again, attempting to quell the fear, the uncertainty, the insistent whisper in his mind telling him he was dancing with damnation. The skiffs crept forward, the engines now a muted purr. The Poseidon's pearl loomed, a dark leviathan casting a long shadow on the water. The pirates approached the precipice, poised to unleash their tempest of destruction. Captain Corbin scanned the horizon, his eyes struggling against the gloom. He perceived nothing, heard nothing. Yet the premonition lingered, a frozen fist clenching in his gut. He reached for the radio, his hand betraying a slight tremor. "This is Captain Corbin," he said, his voice a breath against the silence. "All security personnel, report to the bridge immediately. I repeat, all security personnel to the bridge immediately." He paused, listening for a response. The only sounds were the rig's low thrum and the distant murmur of the sea. He repeated the call, his tone now edged with urgency, louder. Still silence. He cursed under his breath. Where were his people? Why the silence? He turned to the control panel, his gaze flitting across the monitors. Everything appeared nominal.
No alarms, no aberrant readings.
Only the steady, rhythmic pulse of the rig, oblivious to the encroaching darkness. He knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, that they were not alone. The storm had arrived, storming the rig. The Poseidon's pearl loomed against the inky horizon, a metal leviathan silhouetted against the faint starlight. Omar Hassan gripped the railing of the lead skiff, the salt spray stinging his face. Tension thrummed in his chest, a potent cocktail of anticipation and adrenaline. The plan, meticulously crafted over weeks of surveillance, was about to be put to the test. "Remember," Idris Musa, his second in command, barked over the roar of the engines, his voice tight with suppressed energy.
No unnecessary bloodshed.
"We secure the rig, take the crew hostage, and demand the ransom. We stick to the plan." Omar grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes fixed on the approaching platform. "The plan is good, Idris. But the sea rarely follows the map. He adjusted the AK-47 slung across his chest, the cold steel a familiar comfort. Beside him, Jamal shifted nervously, the cheap Kalashnikov feeling heavy and alien in his young hands. The rocking of the skiff churned his stomach, a dull counterpoint to the growing dread in his heart. He glanced at Omar, his face a mask of grim determination, then at Idris, whose stern gaze offered little reassurance. This wasn't the glorious adventure he'd envisioned. It was a descent into a darkness he wasn't sure he was ready for. He thought of his mother, his younger sister, relying on the money he hoped to send home. The thought was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. "Almost there," Omar announced, his voice barely audible above the din. He raised a hand, signaling the other skiffs to close in. "Prepare to board." Aboard the Poseidon's Pearl, Captain Miles Corbin paced the bridge, a gnawing unease settling in his gut. The night was too still, the sea too calm. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He glanced at the radar screen, the blip of a distant vessel barely registering against the background clutter. Probably just a fishing boat, he told himself, but the doubt lingered. "Anything, Mr. Davies?" he asked, addressing the young radio operator hunched over his console. "Negative, Captain. All quiet on the airwaves." Corbin sighed. He trusted his instincts, but without concrete evidence, he couldn't justify raising the alarm. He decided to do another sweep of the security monitors himself. Down in the engine room, Evelyn Reed, the chief engineer, ran her hand along the humming turbine, her brow furrowed in concentration. She loved the rhythmic pulse of the machinery, the intricate dance of gears and pipes that kept the rig alive. But tonight, even the familiar sounds felt discordant, amplified by a nagging sense of foreboding. She double-checked the pressure gauges, the fuel levels, everything in its place but her internal sense of calm. She'd felt this way before, just before the accident on the North Sea. Suddenly, a jarring clang reverberated through the rig, followed by a cacophony of shouts. Evelyn's head snapped up, her eyes widening in alarm. What the hell was that? On the main deck, the pirates swarmed over the railing, their dark figures silhouetted against the floodlights. Omar led the charge, his AK-47 raised, a primal roar escaping his lips.
Allah Akbar.
The two security guards stationed at the entrance barely had time to react. One fumbled for his sidearm, while the other raised his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. Omar didn't hesitate. A short burst of gunfire ripped through the night, and both men crumpled to the deck, their blood staining the steel plating. Jamal, caught in the frenzied rush, stumbled forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The smell of gunpowder and blood filled his nostrils, and he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing he could disappear. Inside the main building, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and the crew scrambled for cover. Corbin, hearing the gunfire, barked orders into the radio. "Security! Security! Report! What the hell is going on?" Silence. Only the crackle of static answered him. "Damn it!" Corbin grabbed his own weapon from the weapons locker, a rusty Beretta he hadn't touched in years. "This is Captain Corbin. All personnel, report to the bridge. We are under attack." A handful of crew members, armed with whatever they could find, wrenches, pipes, even a fire extinguisher, gathered around him, their faces etched with fear and determination. The pirates advanced, sweeping through the corridors, their shouts echoing through the metal passageways. A fierce firefight erupted near the mess hall, the confined space amplifying the deafening roar of gunfire. Tables overturned, chairs splintered, and food splattered across the floor. Omar, pushing his way to the front, spotted a group of crew members barricading themselves behind a stack of crates. He motioned for Idris to flank them while he provided cover fire. "Remember," he shouted over the din, "hostages! We need them alive." Idris nodded and disappeared down a side corridor, his movements swift and deadly. Omar unleashed a hail of bullets, forcing the crew members to duck for cover. Jamal, his legs trembling, found himself pinned behind a vending machine, the glass shattering around him from stray bullets. He caught a glimpse of a crew member, his face contorted in pain, clutching a bleeding arm. The man's eyes met Jamal's, pleading for help. Jamal looked away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. He felt a surge of guilt, a sharp pang of remorse. This wasn't what he wanted. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted to help his family. Has no compassion for you. You are just disposable pieces in his chess game. He shifted his strategy, choosing targets with precision, exploiting their unique vulnerabilities. Idris, the voice purred. How long have you been tethered to Omar's leash, and what fruits has that loyalty yielded? Nothing but crumbs from his opulent feasts. Idris recoiled, his eyes frantically searching for the source of the voice. 4 years, he had been Omar's steadfast right hand, his devotion unquestioned. But, deep down, a residue of resentment simmered, a feeling of being undervalued and exploited. He fears your capabilities, Idris. The voice coaxed, its tone almost intimate. He understands you are superior, more astute. He knows you could supplant him. The mess hall erupted into pandemonium. Accusations flew like poison darts, fueled by growing paranoia and mistrust. The pirates turned on each other, weapons brandished, faces contorted into grotesque masks of rage. Omar, his face flushed crimson with a volatile mix of fury and dread, attempted to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of recriminations and threats. He was losing control, his power eroding before his very eyes. Frank viewed the scene with detached calculation. He had succeeded in sowing division, in setting the pirates against one another. The rig, once a symbol of their dominance, had morphed into a pressure vessel, a crucible of paranoia and brutality. He understood this was merely the opening salvo. The pirates were wounded, but not vanquished. They remained a lethal threat. He had to maintain the pressure, keep them teetering on the precipice, embroiled in internal conflict. He severed the connection to the PA system, plunging the rig back into the void. The abrupt silence was almost physical, broken only by the ragged gasps of the pirates and the distant, mournful echo of metal on metal. Frank departed the comms room, his face etched with determination. He had secured a tactical victory, but the broader war remained. He had a long, treacherous path ahead before he could bring these men to justice, before he could finally quell the voices that echoed in his own mind. He melted back into the labyrinthine corridors, prepared for the next act. The game had only just commenced. Echoes of Somalia, the coppery bite of blood still lingered, a spectral taste clinging to Frank's palate. Crouched in the generator's shadow, the machinery's steady drone offered a strange solace against the rising tide of mayhem he'd set in motion. Omar's voice, a distorted shriek from the rig's speakers, pulsed with rage and suspicion. Frank tuned it out. The board was set. The pieces merely needed to fall. His gaze settled on the Kalashnikov he'd claimed from a fallen pirate. A weapon both primitive and ubiquitous, its very crudeness belied its lethality. As his thumb traced the scarred steel of the receiver, a wave of vertigo buckled him, unexpected and fierce. Abruptly, he wasn't on the Poseidon's pearl. He was drowning in the sun-baked memory of Mogadishu. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Heat radiated off the parched earth, the sun a pitiless glare. Frank, a younger, more brutal version of himself, labored under the weight of his kit. He was part of a clandestine unit hunting the source of weapons flooding the hands of rival warlords. Their directive: sever the supply line. They located it in a sprawling warehouse on the city's fringe. Pallet after pallet of AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenades and ammunition, all glistening with fresh oil, primed for carnage. The air hung thick with the stench of propellant and avarice. A man in a tailored suit oversaw the operation, his Western features etched with a disdain that set Frank's teeth on edge. "Where'd these come from?" Frank barked, his voice a controlled simmer. "Just business, Sergeant Harding," the man replied, his gaze devoid of warmth. "Supply and demand. These people desire instruments of war. I provide them." Frank had witnessed the consequences of that business firsthand. He'd seen the lifeless eyes of children, the burned-out husks of villages, the endless spiral of brutality fueled by these very arms. The sheer volume of ordnance struck him like a physical blow. This was ground zero, the suppurating core of the infection. The team annihilated the warehouse, reducing the weapons to a pool of molten scrap. Yet they knew it was a mere ripple in the pond. The flow would divert, seeking new avenues. The killing would go on. As they retreated, a boy, barely 10 years old, approached. His eyes were vacant with starvation. He clutched a worn AK-47, the weapon nearly as large as he was. "Please, mister," he rasped, his voice thin and brittle. "I need to feed my family." Frank stared, a dull ache blooming in his chest. He saw reflected in those youthful eyes the horrific cost of their intervention, a human tragedy that statistics failed to capture. The boy, and his rifle, remained with Frank, a constant, unwelcome shadow. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He blinked, the boy's image dissolving into the harsh reality of the oil rig. The Kalashnikov in his grip felt imbued with the weight of remembrance, the heavy burden of regret. These pirates, with their desperation and brutality, were simply another iteration of that boy, caught in the same relentless vortex of poverty and bloodshed. But unlike that day in Mogadishu, Frank possessed the power to do more than just disrupt the flow. He could prevent these weapons from being unleashed, could shield innocent lives from shattering. In some small measure, he could perhaps atone for the sins that clung to him. Omar's increasingly frantic voice shattered the silence. "Idris, I know it's you. Don't listen to him. He's poisoning your mind." The power struggle intensified. "Excellent." Frank rose, his movements deliberate and lethal. He checked the AK-47's magazine, the metallic snick cutting through the air. The silenced pistol remained, his preferred tool for intimate encounters. He moved through the rig's steel arteries, a specter in the machine. He was no longer a mere custodian safeguarding his livelihood. He was retribution incarnate, a force of nature unleashed. He was the specter of death, and his time had come. He needed cunning. He required mercilessness. He must exploit their anxieties and vulnerabilities. And he needed to act swiftly, before the situation deteriorated beyond control. A fleeting image of Jamal surfaced, the young pirate who had dared to dream, to yearn for something beyond. His demise was a senseless tragedy, a brutal reminder of the cost of unrelenting violence. Frank vowed to honor his wasted potential. He reached the stairwell leading to the upper deck, where he suspected Omar and Idris were barricaded. Pausing, he inhaled deeply, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation. His path toward absolution, he knew, was paved with strife. A twisted paradox, but one he was prepared to navigate. He would deploy his skills, his training, his hard-won experience to safeguard the innocent and punish the guilty. And perhaps, in doing so, he could finally find peace, whatever form it took. Tightening his grip on the AK-47, he began his ascent. The echoes of Somalia resonated within him, fueling his resolve, hardening his spirit. This was no longer just about survival. It was about breaking the chain, ending the slaughter, remembering those who had fallen prey to the endless cycle of war. It was about finally facing the ghosts of his past and finding a way to carry on, however tarnished and wounded. The hunt spread out. Omar's voice, distorted and magnified by the rig's comms, bounced off the steel walls, a harsh mockery of command. "Find him. He can't be everywhere." The earlier bluster had dissolved into a ragged anxiety that even Idris could taste. Beside Omar in the control room, Idris watched the erratic dance of light and shadow on his superior's face, cast by the jittering monitors. Omar jabbed a thick finger at a schematic, crudely dividing the rig. Alpha Sector, living quarters, you. Hassan, you and yours sweep Beta, the drilling platforms. Musa, Gamma, engine rooms. Every duct, every locker. I want him found. Clear. A chorus of mumbled affirmations replaced the previous bravado, now replaced by a palpable trepidation as they scattered, eager to escape Omar's fraying composure. Idris stayed put. Omar, is this wise? To fragment our forces this way? Omar whirled, eyes reddened and wild. Are you questioning me, Idris? He's just one man. An old man. What, are you spooked by a ghost story? Idris's jaw tightened. I'm wary of missteps. We underestimate him at our peril. He didn't voice Jamal's name, but the boy's vacant stare hung between them. He got lucky, Omar snapped, returning to the screens. Now move. Find him, Idris, before he finds us. With a leaden heart, Idris departed. Gamma Sector was a chaotic web of pipes, dynamos, and clamorous machinery. The air, thick with the reek of lubricant, thrummed with a bone-deep vibration. A perfect hiding place, an easier tomb. He gestured to Abdi and Yusuf, his remaining pair of callow guards, to fan out, their rifles raised, sweat glistening on their brows. Frank slipped through the rig's innards like a phantom. He possessed an intimate knowledge of the place, a cartography etched in memory. Weeks spent cataloging every groan, every dim corner, every secret passage. The pirates relied on force, on volume and menace. He would leverage silence, strategy, the rig itself. Locating a junction box in a forgotten maintenance tunnel, Frank interfaced with the rig's environmental systems. A few calculated adjustments and he redirected the ventilation, pumping a foul, choking smog into the engine rooms, Musa's designated zone. The air, normally processed and regulated, now carried a metallic tang and the cloying sweetness of decay. In Gamma Sector, Idris swore, his vision obliterated. Fog clung to the floor, a swirling shroud obscuring the mechanical jungle. Abdi, Yusuf, respond. His call was devoured by the dense atmosphere and the mechanical roar. Only the scrape of metal on metal, the ragged breathing of his men, reached his ears. I can't see. Abdi's voice, sharp with terror, echoed from his left. Stay grounded, Idris commanded, struggling to project authority. Stick together. We'll locate him. Yet, even as he spoke, he knew they were exposed, helpless. He extended a hand, encountering a frigid, damp pipe. He could feel the engine's pulse, a constant, unnerving drone. From the darkness, Frank observed. He watched the frantic movements of the intruders, their clumsy progress through the fog, weapons flailing. He could practically inhale their fear, a heady, intoxicating brew. He pressed onward, deeper into the structure, leaving Musa's squad to suffocate in the artificial haze. He had other schemes brewing for Hassan and his men in Beta Sector. Reaching a control panel overlooking the drilling platforms, Frank activated the high-pressure coolant system. Instead of a measured stream, he unleashed a furious deluge, drenching the platforms with an icy, relentless downpour. Hassan, caught in the torrent, cursed viciously. What in God's name? The frigid water stung his eyes, blinding him. His men huddled together, teeth chattering, their weapons useless in the sudden squall. The metal decks became treacherous, coated in slick, unforgiving ice. Find shelter, Hassan roared, his voice lost in the rush of water. They stumbled blindly toward the nearest storage shed, struggling to maintain footing on the treacherous surface. Frank watched as they crammed themselves inside, desperately seeking respite from the tempest. A cruel smile played on his lips. Cornered, back in the control room, Omar was shrieking into the comm system. Hassan, Musa, report. What's going on? Only static answered. A deafening silence. Omar's fist crashed against the console, sending sparks scattering. They're gone. He's slaughtered them. Idris, who had managed to fight his way back to the control room, shook his head. No, not slain. Disoriented, perhaps. Isolated. He's toying with us, Omar. Weaponizing the rig. Omar's features twisted into a mask of fury. Then we'll retaliate. I know this rig inside and out. Every line, every valve. He snatched a wrench from a nearby toolbox. I'll drag him into the light myself. Idris watched him depart, a growing foreboding seizing him. Omar was unraveling, consumed by panic and obsession. And a cornered, reckless man was a danger to everyone. Frank lurked patiently in the recesses. He could discern Omar's frantic footfalls echoing through the passages, the rasp of his labored breathing. He was aware Omar was hunting him. Excellent. Let the game commence. Confrontation with Idris. The engine room vibrated. A relentless, metallic pulse felt through the steel underfoot. Frank navigated the space with a hunter's grace, senses sharp, the tang of burnt petroleum stinging his nostrils. Idris couldn't be far. The oppressive heat radiating from the colossal machinery, the bewildering maze of pipes and valves, ratcheted up the tension. He located Idris beside a towering diesel generator, its steady thrum a stark contrast to the frantic drumming in Frank's chest. Back turned, shoulders slumped in defeat, Idris seemed lost in contemplation of the intricate workings before him, a portrait of inner turmoil. Idris, Frank's voice, a low rasp, barely cut through the mechanical cacophony. Idris jolted, spinning around, his AK-47 rising in a reflexive arc. His eyes, normally steely and resolute, now mirrored a tormented uncertainty. You, he breathed, knuckles white on the weapon's grip. We need to talk, Frank stated, raising his open hands in a gesture of peace that felt hollow even to him. Idris lowered the rifle a fraction, but didn't relinquish his hold. Talk? After what you've done. Murdered my brothers. Omar's playing you, Frank retorted, his tone unwavering. He doesn't value you or any of them, only the payout. Idris's face twisted, a mask of fury warring with doubt. Lies. He promised us prosperity. He promised us. His voice died, the light fading from his gaze. That promised prosperity felt increasingly unattainable, a cruel illusion shimmering in the engine room's sweltering air. He dangled the prospect of ransom shares. But how many will survive long enough to spend it? Frank pressed, the truth a barbed hook snagging in Idris's wavering conviction. He's leading you to slaughter, turning you against each other. Idris's eyes flickered, his hesitation visible. Deep inside, he knew the truth of Frank's words. He'd witnessed Omar's transformation, the desperation etched on his face, the cold pragmatism of his decisions. And you? What's your angle? To end this, Frank answered simply. To get everyone off this platform breathing. You included. Idris scoffed, a harsh, mirthless sound. You expect me to swallow that? You're the Reaper, death incarnate. Frank's jaw tightened. The moniker, a weight he carried like a brand, a constant reminder of his shadowed past. That's what I was, he conceded, the words laced with regret. I'm striving to be something different. Striving, Idris spat, hardly reassuring. My duty is to safeguard my men. Safeguard them from Omar, Frank urged. He's the genuine menace here. Silence descended, broken only by the roaring engines. Frank perceived the internal struggle consuming Idris, the battle between allegiance and self-preservation. A chance, however slender, remained to wrest him from the precipice. But time dwindled. Abruptly, a voice thundered from a nearby doorway. Idris, what are you waiting for? Finish him. Omar stormed in, features contorted with unbridled rage, a pistol clutched tightly in his fist. He couldn't resist the chase, the urge to personally destroy the man who had humiliated him. Idris hesitated for a split second, then instinct took over. He raised his AK-47, but instead of aiming at Frank, he swung it toward Omar. "No!" Omar shrieked, squeezing the trigger. The bullet zipped past Idris's ear. Frank reacted instantly, diving for cover behind a cluster of generators. Idris returned fire, the AK-47 vibrating violently in his hands. Projectiles ricocheted off the steel bulkheads, showering the engine room with sparks. The air grew thick with the pungent scent of cordite and the deafening clamor of gunfire. Frank chanced a peek, spotting Omar scrambling for refuge behind a fuel storage tank. He needed to take Omar out of the equation, but Idris was in the firing line. He couldn't risk a stray bullet. Frank adjusted his position, targeting a control panel near Omar. One precise shot. He fired. The round impacted the panel, unleashing a cascade of sparks and severed wires. Lights flickered erratically, plunging sections of the engine room into a dim half-light. A piercing shriek filled the atmosphere as the generator began to fail. Omar, momentarily stunned, stumbled from behind the fuel tank. Idris seized the moment, unleashing a torrent of bullets. Omar cried out, clutching his wounded arm, and vanished behind another piece of machinery. However, the damage was done. A stray round from Idris had pierced a high-pressure hydraulic line. A geyser of fluid erupted, coating the engine room in highly flammable oil. The failing generator's whine intensified, growing more urgent, more menacing. "Idris, get out of here!" Frank bellowed, scrambling to his feet. "That thing's about to blow." Idris, realizing the imminent danger, paused only for a heartbeat before wheeling around and sprinting towards the exit. Frank followed closely, his heart hammering against his ribs. They were almost at the doorway when it happened. A searing flash, immediately followed by a concussive blast. The engine room shuddered violently, throwing Frank and Idris off their feet. A wave of intense heat engulfed them, scorching their exposed skin. Frank scrambled to his feet, coughing uncontrollably, his eyes stinging from the thick smoke. The engine room had become a raging inferno, the flames spreading rapidly through the spilled oil. Visibility was near zero, the air thick and unbreathable. He spotted Idris sprawled on the deck, dazed but conscious. He seized Idris's arm and hauled him upright. "We have to move." They stumbled through the blazing chaos, dodging falling debris and leaping over burning wreckage. The heat was unbearable, agonizing. Frank could feel his skin prickling, starting to blister. Finally, they reached the doorway, collapsing onto the comparative safety of the corridor outside. The fire alarm shrieked, a piercing, insistent wail. Behind them, the engine room raged, a testament to the destruction they had unleashed. The blaze was spreading with terrifying speed, threatening to consume the entire rig. Omar had vanished. Frank turned to Idris, whose face was blackened with soot, his eyes wide with shock. "We have to end this," Frank rasped, his voice hoarse, "before it spreads too far." Idris nodded grimly. He understood with a chilling certainty that their ordeal was far from over. They had simply exchanged one circle of hell for another. The oil rig, formerly a symbol of industry and progress, had become a blazing tomb, and they were trapped inside. Reaper versus Omar. Acrid smoke, thick as a shroud, choked Frank, a burning rasp in his lungs. Idris, beside him, coughed, the inferno painting his eyes with molten light. The engine room was lost. Escape was their only option. "He's gone," Idris croaked, gesturing to the mangled remains. Omar, swallowed by the fumes. Frank's jaw tightened. Swallowed wasn't accurate. Omar was a viper, built to slip into the gloom. And a trapped viper was lethal. "He won't let this drop," Frank stated, his voice a sandpapery whisper. "He knows we're coming." They navigated the gantry, the metal a blistering griddle beneath their feet, each step a perilous gamble above the ravenous blaze. The roar of the conflagration hammered their ears, punctuated by the brittle snap of incinerating circuits and the viperous hiss of escaping steam. The air reeked of oil and oblivion. Frank, leading, felt every nerve thrum. He searched the dancing shadows, his hands ghosting for the familiar comfort of a sidearm. He clutched a salvaged pipe wrench, a pitiful substitute. Suddenly, Idris's grip stopped him cold. "Up there," he breathed, indicating a catwalk bridging the fiery abyss. A figure stood outlined by the furnace glow, the glint of an AK-47 barrel catching the light. Omar. Deliberately, he lowered the rifle. "Frank Harding," he announced, his voice amplified by the echoing space. "The ghost in the machine. I know who you truly are." Frank remained silent, suspicion hardening his gaze. How? Had his cover been blown? Had he grown complacent? Omar chuckled, a parched, brittle sound. "Reaper, that's what they called you. The bringer of death. Stories whispered in the squalor of Mogadishu. A myth, some said. But legends bleed truth, don't they?" The revelation hung, as thick and noxious as the smoke itself. A cold dread coiled in Frank's gut. His past, buried so deep, clawed its way back from the pyre. "You thought you could disappear here, playing the unassuming maintenance man?" Omar sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You believed you could outrun your nature?" He raised the AK-47, leveling it at Frank. "But you can't, can you? The Reaper always returns to reap." Frank shoved Idris behind him. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice laced with steel. "This isn't your fight, Idris." Omar spat, his focus laser-locked on Frank. "This is between the Reaper and me. A debt, finally collected." Omar unleashed a fusillade, bullets tearing through the air, gouging chunks from the metal latticework. Frank ducked, dragging Idris down. The catwalk shuddered under the assault, showering them in sparks and hot debris. "We have to move," Frank yelled above the din. They scrambled along the gantry, weaving through the storm of lead. Relentless, Omar pursued them, the AK-47 coughing out destruction. The heat was punishing, the smoke suffocating, but Frank pressed on, driven by the raw will to survive. Reaching the end, they dropped to a lower level, landing jarringly on a metal platform. Omar followed, leaping with surprising alacrity. He closed the distance, hate blazing in his eyes. "Nowhere left to hide, Reaper," he snarled, discarding the emptied rifle. "Let's see if those legendary skills haven't rusted away." He lunged, a blade erupting in his hand. Frank deflected the blow with the pipe wrench, the metallic clang echoing through the inferno's roar. Omar pressed his attack, a furious dance of jabs and slashes, each aimed to cripple. Frank dodged and parried, using the wrench to ward off the onslaught, his movements honed by a lifetime of combat. He was rusty, yet the instincts remained, simmering beneath layers of denial. The clash was savage, a desperate ballet for survival amid the inferno. Omar, younger, stronger, consumed by rage and vengeance. But Frank carried the weight of experience, a veteran's knowledge etched into his bones. They exchanged blows, each strike laden with the baggage of their history. A searing agony bloomed in Frank's side as Omar's knife sliced his flesh. He grunted, ignoring the pain, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. An opening appeared, and he exploited it, swinging the pipe wrench. The impact landed squarely on Omar's wrist, shattering bone. Omar screamed, the knife clattering to the ground. Frank pressed his advantage, forcing Omar back towards the platform's edge. Omar stumbled, terror widening his eyes. Frank stood over him, the pipe wrench raised, his face a mask of grim resolve. He could end it here, erase the ghost that had haunted his every waking moment. Yet something restrained him. He lowered the wrench, his grip loosening. "It's over, Omar," he rasped, his voice raw. "I'm not going to kill you." Omar stared up at him, disbelief etched on his face. You won't." "No," Frank said. "But you will face the consequences. For the innocent blood on your hands, for the lives you shattered. He kicked the knife away, beyond Omar's reach. The authorities are inbound. They'll be here shortly. You can explain yourself to them. Speechless, Omar stared at him, his face contorted with fury and despair. He attempted to rise, but his shattered wrist buckled, and he slumped back onto the platform. Frank turned, leaving Omar to his reckoning. He found Idris, whose eyes mirrored understanding. "Let's go," Frank said, indicating the escape route. "We need to abandon this platform." As they retreated, Frank glanced back at Omar, a solitary figure framed by the flames. He was no longer the Reaper, the Angel of Vengeance. He was merely Frank Harding, a man desperately seeking redemption. The fire still raged, but for the first time in years, Frank felt a tentative ember of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, peace was finally within reach. Ghosts fade. The escalating vibrations morphed from a distant tremor into a skull-rattling thunder. Frank, pinned against a wall blackened by fire, felt the resonance deep within his bones. Choppers, a squadron of them by the sound. Reinforcements, finally. He remained stoic as the lead helicopter, a dark shape against the lightning sky, touched down on the landing zone. Piercing spotlights sliced through the lingering haze. Tactical teams fast-roped to the deck, weapons at the ready, their movements honed and precise. The professionals were here while he was just a glorified caretaker. Omar, still cradling his seared arm, observed the scene with mingled relief and seething resentment. His remaining fighters, a pathetic few, were rapidly disarmed and subdued. Their will to resist had evaporated hours before, supplanted by dread and a primal urge to escape this inferno. He caught sight of Idris being escorted away, head slumped in defeat, and a fresh surge of bile rose in his throat. "You!" A brusque voice shattered his thoughts. An officer with a granite face and all-seeing eyes pointed a finger. "Hassan, you're the ringleader? Move it. Now." Omar, his pride bruised, but his instinct for survival paramount, complied. He was shoved toward a waiting bird, the downdraft buffeting him and stinging his eyes. He chanced a backward glance at the ravaged platform, at the defiant flames reaching for the heavens, and a silent promise solidified within him. This wasn't finished. Unseen in the gloom, Frank watched as the rig was methodically secured. Medics rushed to assist the injured, both captives and captors. Engineers began assessing the structural integrity. The air buzzed with clipped radio transmissions, a symphony of efficient professionalism. He noticed the last of the pirates being marched aboard the helicopters, their faces a study in humiliation and dread. He glimpsed the terror in their eyes, the same terror he had witnessed in his adversaries, and, truthfully, in his own heart. The endless repetition, the blaze, fueled by leaking crude and wrecked machinery, refused to yield easily. Fireboats, summoned from the mainland, unleashed torrents of water onto the inferno. The shriek of the water cannons amplified the already deafening clamor. He knew he should leave. He'd accomplished his mission, perhaps even surpassed it. He had sheltered the vulnerable, neutralized the pirates, and confronted his inner demons. But the specters still haunted him, murmuring in the shadows of his mind. An invisible force drew him to the edge of the platform, where he gazed out at the vast, indifferent expanse of the ocean. The first tendrils of dawn painted the firmament with strokes of coral and amethyst. The air, though still pungent with the acrid tang of smoke, felt marginally cleaner, more vital. He fished into his pocket and withdrew the dog tag. Harding, Francis, USN. The inscription of a phantom. He'd carried it for so long, a tangible reminder of his identity, of the deeds he had committed. He scrutinized it for a moment, the metal cool against his palm. Then, with a subtle flick of his wrist, he cast it overboard. It vanished into the turbulent waters, swallowed by the abyss. Let the sea claim it. Let the phantoms dissolve. He pivoted and slipped away, melting back into the penumbra. A sense of purpose guided him now, a quiet determination in his gait. He knew the labyrinthine structure like the lines on his own hand, every duct, every access point, every secluded alcove. He located a maintenance hatch leading to a lower level, a seldom-used passage. Below decks, the temperature dropped, the air less saturated with smoke. He navigated the tight passageways, his senses heightened. He could hear the distant clamor of the rescue operation overhead, but here, in the belly of the beast, only silence reigned. He discovered what he sought. A small, inflatable life raft, tucked away in a supply closet. He inflated it swiftly, methodically, sufficient for one. He lowered the raft into the water using a rope ladder to descend. The ocean was restless, the waves crashing against the rig's steel hull. He cast off, the raft drifting away from the colossal structure. As he paddled away from the Poseidon's pearl, he glanced back. The rig was engulfed in flames, a blazing testament to the violence and pandemonium of the last few hours. He spotted the helicopters circling, the fireboats unleashing their relentless volleys of water. A tableau of devastation, yet also one of deliverance. He turned his back on the scene and faced the open sea. The sun was emerging, a radiant orb of hope on the horizon. He paddled toward it, toward the promise of a fresh beginning. He possessed no map, no endpoint. He didn't know where he was headed or what awaited him. All he knew was that he was unfettered, released from the specters of his former life, absolved of the weight of his unspoken secrets. He pondered Omar, still living, still fueled by vengeance. He recognized that Omar would likely pursue retribution, that the cycle of brutality might persist. But he had made his decision. He had spared Omar's life, not out of compassion, but from a yearning to sever the links of the chain. He had contributed what he could. The rest was destiny's to decide. He closed his eyes, savoring the warmth of the sun on his face, the mist of the ocean on his skin. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp, saline air. He was isolated, adrift on the boundless ocean. But he was not fearful. He was tranquil. He had settled a debt. He had shielded the defenseless. He had confronted his inner turmoil. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had broken the endless cycle. The specters receded. The reaper was banished. Only Frank endured.